The Erie County Bar Foundation started back in 1957 when a small group of friends came together to help a colleague in need. Today, it is specifically chartered to assist lawyers in times of personal and professional crisis that arise as a result of stress, anxiety, substance abuse, emotional distress, or other illnesses, such as cancer. During my 6 years on the board of directors, depressive illnesses became increasingly prevalent among the attorneys who came to the foundation for assistance. While every circumstance is unique and compelling, I can't recall a single recent case where depression didn't play a part. Our foundation is available to help in various ways, but what's most important in every case is the necessity for the lawyer to reach out and get help. There are endless resources readily available to those who may be suffering in silence. The foundation covers the cost of psychiatric evaluations, medication, counseling, all of the tools that a depressed individual needs to begin recovering from this debilitating illness. It's essential for lawyers to realize that it's actually a sign of strength, not weakness, to accept help to face these struggles head on. I applaud those who appear in this film for their courage in bringing this problem to light. If you or a colleague are struggling with depression or anxiety, please don't let professional pride prevent you from doing what it takes to get your life back. Outside of Erie County, lawyers throughout New York State and across the nation are fortunate to belong to a profession that makes resources available to help lawyers, judges, and law students. Lawyer assistance programs, originally organized to address alcoholism and substance abuse, now also provide assistance with depression, anxiety, and stress. They provide assessments and evaluations, as well as referrals to appropriate treatment settings. Here in New York State, these services are confidential and free. The lawyer assistance programs are a logical first step for lawyers seeking help with depression and other mental health concerns.
Law as a profession, I think, breeds depression.
I didn't know what depression was.
Depression, above all else, is a vicious circle.
Being a judge is a very isolating experience.
As a woman, depression was different for me.
It stops your brain.
Why anyone would commit suicide.
I am now the most miserable man living. If what I feel were distributed to the whole human family, there would not be one cheerful face left on earth.
Joshua Wolfshank is the author of the acclaimed book, Lincoln's Melancholy, How Depression Fueled a Presidency to Greatness. We caught up with him in New York City and asked him to share with us his insights into Lincoln, the man, lawyer, and president, and how he struggled with depression.
Trying to describe Lincoln's story, I looked at the whole story from beginning to end, and I tried to look at what remained constant and what changed. What remained constant is that from his early 20s, melancholy was a big feature of his life, what we would today call depression. What changed, though, is that when he was in his early 20s and his mid-20s and early 30s, he often had something very much like what we would call major depression, where he was withdrawn. There were several periods where he didn't work. He talked about suicide. He often talked about how awful life was and how hard it was to bear, and he was very out with it in a typical way. And he would, if a modern clinician looked at him at this time, they would diagnose major depression.
Depression is a very funny thing. When I first sought treatment, I didn't know anything about chemical imbalances. I didn't know anything about the physiological causes of the problem.
Dr. Richard O'Connor is a therapist in New York City and has written extensively about depression. He is the author of the best-selling book, Undoing Depression: What Therapy Can't Teach You and Medication Can't Give You. We asked him to speak with us about depression and its role in our society and the legal profession.
Well, depression is officially, the textbook definition has to do with you have to have a depressed mood, or life doesn't bring, the ordinary activities don't bring to you the joy they normally do for a period of at least 2 weeks. And then there have to be a bunch of other symptoms like appetite slows down or increases, trouble sleeping is probably the most frequent one, trouble concentrating, trouble focusing, trouble with eating. Most people eat too much. Some people lose their appetite altogether, and trouble with sexual functioning. Those are all sort of aspects of depression. And there's a lot more informally that the textbook doesn't cover.
We traveled to Seattle, Washington to meet with Dr. Andrew Benjamin and Dr. David Dunner. We spoke with Dr. David Dunner, a Seattle psychiatrist and recognized authority on depression, about the impact of depression on the human brain.
How does depression affect the brain?
We know that depression has effects on the brain that we've begun to measure with imaging techniques in particular. For example, certain areas of the brain, the left prefrontal cortex, the left frontal part of the brain, tends to function differently in patients when they're depressed than when they're well. There are areas in the deep structures of the brain, particularly the hippocampus, which is a small structure in the brain, which shrinks in people who are depressed. And it's thought that the stress that occurs during depression causes an increase in a compound called cortisol. And the cortisol actually affects the hippocampus in the brain by causing cells to die. And when you get rid of the depression, when it's treated or when it's over, those cells can come back and hippocampus will again increase during treatment of depression.
Well, the World Bank and the World Health Organization commissioned a study about 3 years ago. They were looking for knowledge about where to spend their money best in terms of preventing disease. And I think to everybody's surprise, they found that depression was perhaps the second most costly disease that there is worldwide in terms of lost productivity, the cost of treatment, the effect on families and general social functioning, absenteeism at work. All these things grouped together mean it's more costly than AIDS, it's more costly than cancer, it's more costly than diabetes, it's more costly to the world than anything except heart disease. And they predict that depression will soon outstrip heart disease in terms of impact.
Andrew Sparkler is a Manhattan attorney and a 2005 graduate of Fordham Law School. We talked with him about his good friend and law school classmate, David Nee, who suffered from depression and killed himself in his third year at law school. Following David's death in 2005, he, along with David's family and friends, set up the Dave Neve Foundation in 2006. Andrew is the president of the foundation.
The type of person who goes to law school tends to be a motivated, intelligent type person. And I think that the weird thing about depression is that, or at least in Dave's case, these signs that he exhibited, these signs they're common. He didn't display sort of rare signs, or weird, out there symptoms of depression. These are basic, when your friend's not around a lot, you can't get in touch with him, he's drinking a lot. These are like big warning signs, red flags, and we missed them. And we missed them because we didn't have the vocabulary, the emotional awareness to recognize this. And it's not a tough concept. This isn't like patent law. This is easy stuff. Easy stuff to recognize. And we just had no idea. And I think that's a hard thing when there's this sort of a group of people who are good at getting things done and good at figuring things out, and here's this specter of depression that killed, our friend, and, we missed it.
Dr. Andy Benjamin, a professor at the University of Washington in Seattle, obtained both a law and clinical psychology degree, and currently counsels lawyers who struggle with depression. He was the lead researcher that conducted a study to determine just how prevalent depression was in law schools in this country.
So over 5 years of time, longitudinal data were collected on this particular law school. That was the first longitudinal study of law students, and I actually collected data on the students before they entered law school, throughout their attendance in law school, and then after law school. I actually followed 3 different classes so that we had cross-sectional data. And those data were very compelling. They showed that as much as a third of the law school were suffering from some serious psychopathology at any time. 19% of those young people were suffering from major depression. And it wouldn't take very long from entering law school for the depression to begin to develop.
To admit that you are depressed, to yourself or to others, well, that's a weakness. And if you're in a Shark Tank of sort of these hyper-aggressive folks around you in this environment where it's very high stress, well, that's a weakness that you probably would be hesitant to expose. Because why would you fess up to anyone that you have this problem? And the fact of the matter is, many people in law school are depressed. Many law students are depressed. There's one study that says that 40% of law students have had an issue, a bout with depression, by the time they graduate.
The law as a profession, I think, breeds depression. A lot of that has to do with the fact that your interactions with people are negative in nature. Add to that the stress, the mental strain, even the physical strain. All of that can trigger a depressive incident.
The Honorable Michael Miller is a retired family court judge from Rochester, New York, who served on the bench there for 10 years. We went to Rochester to talk with him about his own depression and depression's impact on the judiciary.
And it's because of the tension. It's an adversarial profession. It has become an overcrowded profession. It has become a profession where now you can advertise all you want. When I came in, you couldn't even put your name in bold type in the phone book.
My depression first hit when I was about 40 years old, or about 8 years ago. At the time, I had been litigating cases and had a very busy life as a lawyer. And I really didn't know what depression was. I started feeling very tired all the time, like cement was running through my veins. I found it difficult to concentrate and be organized at work. I had trouble sleeping. I'd often get up about 3 in the morning, even though I was very tired. I couldn't sleep. So what I usually did was drive to an all-night coffee shop and drink coffee, and me and my coffee would wait for the sun to come up, and then I would drive to work.
I should also say, in terms of attorneys, one of the major areas of effect is on the ability to think. Our ability to concentrate, to focus, to retain new information, to make decisions is all impacted severely by depression. So that and that of course just feeds the vicious circle. Depression, above all else, is a vicious circle. We can't stop doing the things that make us depressed because we don't know how to do anything different. In some cases, like with the changes that happen in thinking and cognition, we're not even possibly we're not even aware of those changes going on, but they have their effect on our success, on our lives, on our relationships.
It is very rarely talked about among judges. Being a judge is a very isolating experience. And a lot of times my colleagues, they took the phrase, "In God we trust," which is before every bench in New York State, and they thought the God in that sentence was referring to them. And nothing could go wrong. They were strong. If they went for help, I know judges who have paid their therapists in cash because they don't want any insurance to cover it, they don't want any paper trail. If they have ambitions for higher office or to get reelected, they're sure that if ever got out, it would ruin their chances for that.
But I think also that you have to look at the high stress load that lawyers carry. You know, the long hours, the mental discipline required, the loss of respect in the community, which I think hurts many people, the competition to get a good position and to get a good place in a good firm. Those things have all increased over the last 25 years dramatically. And I think they really have their impact on lawyers.
As a woman, I think depression was different for me, partly because of the role that society assigns to women. The first time I was really depressed and suicidal was when I was out of work. And the stress of not working really brought me down. I felt that my self-image and self-worth was tied up in my work. And when I wasn't able to get a job, I became despondent.
I got the call from my very good friend, Wynn Kelly, who was in my section of Fordham, and he said, you know, something about, I have terrible news. Dave killed himself. And it was just, you know, it's one of those things, for me anyway, but it's really, it's like you were tased. I assume. I've never been tased. But, you know, it's like it's so jarring. It stops your brain almost. It's not, again, you know, everyone's experience is different, but for me, I didn't immediately start crying and I didn't have 1,000,001 questions. It was just, it really was, you know, like someone just, you know, all sort of thought drained out of my head.
Why someone with depression would commit suicide. Why anyone would commit suicide. You have to understand that most people who are approaching suicide have been living in a terrible world for a while, you know, months, years, a long time. They've been living in a world where they don't see anything good happening to them. They don't have any expectations of things changing for the better. They often feel that they're to blame themselves for things being as they are. In fact, most people, I think, when they're actually on the verge of suicide, have got themselves around to thinking that their loved ones and friends would be better off without them.
I do remember Dave's funeral. I will never forget it. It was profoundly saddening. Really, really uniquely upsetting sort of experience.
In terms of, helping with yourself with depression, I think that's an excellent idea. I think that most people with depression are not going to be cured by taking a pill or even by psychotherapy. I think that most people with depression really do have to learn how to help themselves. One of the first steps is recognizing that this is a disease and that you're not to blame for it. However, you're responsible for it. And so you have to start practicing good self-care. You have to invest in yourself like you think you're worth investing in. So you have to exercise, you have to eat right, you have to make sure that you get enough sleep at night. You have to become aware of how you treat the people around you and start being more considerate and more thoughtful and smiling more, because those things pay off and they'll start you feeling better too.
I developed the website Lawyers with Depression for law students, lawyers, and judges because I know from personal experience how isolating and lonely a condition depression can be for anybody, but especially for lawyers because of the stigma involved. And I went looking for a website a few years ago to see if there was one for depressed lawyers. I thought I might contribute an article about my own experiences. When I couldn't find one, I was shocked that I couldn't find one. I built one, and I put in there articles, podcasts, interviews, all kinds of resources that a lawyer suffering from depression could use. They could go in their office, close the door, and learn about depression and how they can cope with it.
Dr. Jamie Schiffner is a clinical psychologist from Buffalo, New York, who facilitates a depression support group for lawyers.
The group meets every 2 weeks, and we've developed some structures such as a ritual for how to open the group and some things that I think protect the confidentiality of the group, which I think is very important in helping it to feel safe and to be a good forum for these lawyers to find support from one another. Mainly what happens, it's not so much an advice giving that where anybody tells anybody else what to do, but it's much more so a place where somebody can talk about the stresses they face, the struggles with their depression, the successes they have in dealing with depression, and have colleagues who really understand, one, about depression, but also what it is to be a lawyer. And what's unique about this situation is that it's lawyers helping lawyers. It's people who know about their profession, and there is something in that fraternity or sorority of lawyers that is really quite unique to any profession.
The primary takeaway I have from the support group is the chance to listen to others who are similarly situated. I like to hear about how other people are developing skills and approaches to address depression and anxiety in their life. I have had the benefit of trying to be mindful of stress in my life and trying to prevent it from causing problems in my life, primarily depression. I treated with a psychologist about 10 years ago, and since that time I haven't used medication, I haven't treated with a psychologist. I didn't want my life to be defined by depression.
My spiritual life is very important to me. In the past few years, I've come to believe in a God who is personally interested in me and wants the best for me. And I realize that I can lessen my stress when I'm able to handle problems over to God and let Him take care of them, and I don't worry about them. Then I don't have to deal with that stress.
So much of the time when we train people up in law school and they begin their careers, they forsake their personal values. And I found that in large part, actually having people delineate what those values are, to ask them to act congruently with those values across various competencies, life competencies, is a really critical juncture in trying to figure out where their life isn't going well and what can be done about those aspects of the life that are not going well.
The main way that Lincoln took care of himself around his depression were with his own strategies of working hard and working increasingly for things that mattered to him, using humor as a way of deflecting the pain of the world and playing it in a different way. He was a great comic and humorist, and this is just a huge part of his life. And the third was poetry and sort of very severe articulations of gloom and its pain. Lincoln loved dark, lugubrious, romantic poetry, and he even wrote some of this poetry. One of his poems ends with this line, "I'm living in the tombs," about his communion with people who are already dead and gone. So, and you could say that those two things, the laughter and the humor, are opposite, but really they're both ways of engaging with the world around him and not hiding these feelings, but finding some constructive way to work with them.
I also think it's important for loved ones to get involved with a depressed lawyer in their recovery. And that would include family members, friends, colleagues, members of the Bar Association who are concerned about a lawyer who may be going through depression. The first thing they can do, of course, is become educated. Educated about what depression is, what the signs are, and to recognize that that person who may be in a lot of, maybe struggling a lot in their practice as a lawyer and in their personal life, can't go through this alone, can't recover on their own. That person needs really a team of people surrounding him or her to recover.
Loved ones often see, but they don't feel they have permission to comment. But they can see how you've been dragging yourself around. They can see that you're not enjoying yourself anymore. They can see that you have stopped jogging. They see that you've been going to too many doctor's appointments. They see that you're drinking more. All these kinds of things that are sort of early indicators of depression. And really one of the biggest pieces of news about depression is that we know that the earlier you get help, the better off you are. The better your chance of total recovery.
So the idea behind the Dave Nee Foundation is just to make people aware of depression and of the stigma that exists surrounding depression and of the particular stigma that exists surrounding depression in the legal community.
In total, from the time that I first started to see a psychologist and use medication, I treated my depression for a period of about 10 to 12 months. I haven't looked back since.
Abraham Lincoln was one of the great lawyers and, of course, one of the great leaders in American history and indeed in human civilization. And his lawyering prepared him for that leadership. He really was at heart a lawyer. He intended to go back to the law practice when he finished his presidency. So he was this enormously accomplished man. And at the same time, his whole life, he struggled with what his friends and colleagues referred to as a terrible melancholy.
And they can never give up hope. That's the last thing. Don't give up hope. I almost did. I mean, I contemplated suicide. I really did, Dan. But somehow I just hung on to a bare thread of hope. And sometimes that's all you can do. My dad used to tell me, Michael, when you reach the end of your rope, tie a knot and hang on. And that's what I was doing.
I wanted to give back to the legal community.
It's lawyers helping lawyers.
I didn't want my life to be defined by depression.
My spiritual life is important to me.
He was a great comic and humorist.
You have to invest in yourself.
I haven't looked back since.
And they can never give up hope.